All right. Uh, Thank you all for being here again this week. Welcome to Crossroads, the Resources for Landowners Series. My name is Luke Peer again, and I'm a graduate student at UWGB working on a project here in Door County to assemble restoration resources for landowners. We are excited about this series and the other opportunities Crossroads provides, thanks to our amazing donors. Tonight we have Amy Schaefer here from Pheasants Forever to speak about the programs they offer for private landowners. Our next talk in the series will be on August 8th, 2 weeks from now at 5:30, and that will be Tim Dahl and the new Door County Invasive Species Coordinator. They're from Door County Soil and Water. Thank you all for coming tonight. Please fill out my landowner survey in the back on the table if you haven't already. And here's Amy.
Hi guys, so my name's Amy Schaefer. I'm a farm bill biologist hired through Pheasants Forever, and I help landowners in the area. I cover the surrounding 9 counties, including Door County. I help them with prairie establishment, finding funding sources for them, and just general wildlife habitat with a focus on upland habitat. So the agenda today, we're going to go over who Pheasants Forever is and what we do, what a prairie is and why we're so interested in them, how to start your own prairie if that's something you want to do on your property, how to maintain that prairie, and some financial assistance that Jason didn't cover last week. So Pheasants Forever is a grassroots organization that was originally founded in 1982 by a couple of pheasant hunters that saw the connection between upland habitat loss and declining pheasant populations. So thus the Habitat Organization, as we nickname ourselves, was born with a focus on conserving pheasants, quail, and other wildlife through habitat improvements, public access, education, and conservation advocacy. And how we do this in 40 states and parts of Canada is through 130,000 members nationwide. A diverse staff. We have over 260 biologists throughout the nation, even in Florida, helping work on private lands. And we're the #1 company in the nation with biologists. We just surpassed Fish and Wildlife Service recently. We also have local chapters, more than 700 nationwide. And we also have a government affairs team that works with partners at the White House to advocate for good conservation policy. So we're a local organization, so we really rely on our local chapters to get boots on the ground, get habitat on the ground. And unique among Pheasants Forever chapters is they retain 100% of the decision-making power of what to do with the funds they raise. So the local chapter here that covers Door County is the Northeast Wisconsin Pheasants Forever chapter. And their mission is to create and improve upland habitat, foster youth hunting, getting them outdoors as well, and then public education. And if you're ever interested in joining the chapter, seeing what they're all about, they have chapter meetings monthly. And yeah, you can reach out to me if you'd like to learn more about them or attend a meeting. Otherwise, they do have a Facebook page if you want to follow them, and they have a few events throughout the year. Alrighty, so what is a prairie? A prairie is an ecosystem made of grasses, sedges, and forbs, otherwise called wildflowers, and they're notably devoid of woody vegetation. Prairies rely on this thing called succession. So succession is this process of how plant communities ultimately dominate or colonize bare rock. So you have bare rock, and then you have lichens that break up those rocks, and eventually you'll get to trees. So this is what'll happen if the world was in a bubble, but the world is not. We do have things called disturbances, like fire, that set that community back to its baseline bare ground state. And this is why prairies are often called early successional communities, because they rely on this disturbance, usually fire or grazing, to make sure they don't become forested. The reason they're able to do this is the seeds can lie dormant for decades just waiting for the right conditions. So even if a forest fire wipes through a closed canopy conifer planting, they'll be lying dormant there ready to spring up. Notably, this pink plant up here is called fireweed. You'll often see that blooming right after a fire sweeps through. Prairies historically covered 550 million acres of the U.S., of which only 40% remains today. Specifically, Wisconsin is in the tall grass prairie region, of which 200 million acres historically encompassed, but now only 11% remains today. And that's mainly due to agriculture and woody encroachment. So Wisconsin specifically had 2 million acres of prairie, of which only 0.1% remains today. And while looking at this map, you might be wondering, like, why are we establishing prairies in areas that used to be forested? And here's a couple of reasons why. Prairies offer a lot of different functions. So one of them is water quality. Notably, we use them as filter strips along water bodies. As above ground, it's giving the sediment something to trap before it goes straight into the water. And water quality below, so you might have seen this picture before, but native plants have an extensive and deep root system that helps stop sediment running off by holding the sediment down with its roots, but also it helps with ground recharge with their deep roots. That's often why rain gardens have native plants, because of their deep root system. Also, soil health. It's a very complicated process what's going on beneath the ground between fungi, bacteria, microorganisms, and native plants help to restore that, because every year almost 50% of their roots die back, and that's just adding new materials for all the critters down there to do their thing. But notably, healthy soil is better at absorbing water than non-healthy soil. If you ever look at a rainfall simulator on YouTube, you'll see the dirt just goes straight through conventionally tilled soil versus ones with prairie that holds that water in there. Also, carbon sequestration, which is a more recent initiative. So native plants tend to store more carbon deeper in the ground because of their roots than introduced grasses. Also, you'll usually hear people talk about trees storing carbon, which they do more of, but the issue is they store all that carbon above ground in their trunks and leaves, which normally isn't an issue, but because of climate change and 100 years of fire suppression due to Smokey the Bear, we're having more wildfires, which just releases that carbon straight into the atmosphere again, versus native plants that are putting it underground, which is why there's kind of a push for native plants. And our favorite, wildlife. So a lot of different species of wildlife benefit from prairies, from insects to our game birds and game species like deer, pheasants, even grassland birds, which are imperiled animal group. They're facing 40% declines because they're losing their prairie, and little mice and moles. Notably, an interesting project, Chris Helzer, he's kind of a famous guy in the prairie community. He did a square meter project where he took a square meter of a prairie, and over the course of a growing summer, he took as many pictures of different critters as he could find, and he found over 200 species of insects, plants, and fungi in that square meter alone. So if that doesn't attest to how beneficial prairies are for wildlife, I don't know what is. And if you've ever talked to a biologist, we push diversity every chance we get. And that's because all those functions I just talked about increase when you have more diversity. So the more diversity you have above ground, the more diversity you're going to have below ground, and the happier your ecosystem is going to be. Alrighty, now to get in the meat and potatoes, you learned about all these great functions a prairie has. Let's get one on your property. So the initial planning phase, these are some questions for you to consider before you start to plan for your prairie. But what's your existing slate? This acreage you're trying to plant, what's out there, and what's the history of that? Was it cropped years ago? Has it been fallow for the past 5 years? What's the history? What kind of equipment do you have access to, or can you acquire? Or do you need to hire a contractor for the whole process? What do you want your prairie to look like? Is there any specific things you want to see out there? Is there any species you want to manage for, like monarch, butterflies, pheasants, deer? What's your budget for the project? And what kind of level of management can you commit to the prairie in the future? Like we said, prairies aren't a stagnant ecosystem. You can't just plant it and walk away, but you have to commit to some kind of management over the long term. So site preparation is arguably the most important step of a prairie. It can either make or break your planting. And we'll just go over a couple different scenarios and what my recommendation would be for your site prep. So soybeans is the easiest to do. You can broadcast into this because, sorry. Soybeans are the best prep you can have because the soil is packed and there's very little residue. This is about the only scenario that I recommend that you can broadcast into. If you can talk to your farmer before you do a prairie planting, if they can plant soybeans, that'd be great. Corn is about the next best thing. The only issue is it can tend to have a lot of residue left over, so I'd recommend to use a no-till drill just to break through that residue and make sure you have good seed-to-soil contact when you plant your prairie. Otherwise, you can do a very light tillage on the surface just to get some bare ground exposed. One thing to consider is if you're planting on cropland is the herbicide history. Some herbicides can have a very long carryover. For example, corn, sometimes atrazine is used, which can have an 18-month carryover. So you don't want to waste all this money on seed just for it not to come up because of herbicide. So just talk to your farmer, or if you're the one farming it, just look back at those herbicides. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to your local county agronomist through the Soil and Water Department if you have questions on residual herbicide. Next is alfalfa or mixed forage if there's grasses in there. So this is a perennial crop, so it will require some kind of termination. My recommendation is to use herbicide, either 2,4-D or you can use dicamba with a mix of glyphosate in the fall prior to killing freeze, so usually sometime in September. You want to make sure the temperature is around 60 or 70 degrees. You don't want to do it while it's super cold out there. And you want to make sure there's at least 4 to 6 inches of regrowth after the last haying. I would also, in this scenario, wait until spring to seed just because alfalfa tends to be hard to kill, so you might want to see if it comes up that following spring and hit it again if it starts to come up. 2,4-D does have a 30-day residual soil activity, so you should wait at least 30 days to seed after that. Otherwise, conventionally, tillage was used to terminate alfalfa, not surface level, deep tillage. So because of that tillage, you'll want to go through and cultipack that site just to firm up that seed bed. And you might want to consider waiting until the spring, seeing if, because that tillage is going to bring up a lot of weed seeds, and you'll want to spray those down before you seed. Fallow wheat or fallow sites, places that haven't been cropped in a long time. These are the most difficult to prep, and they're the most likely to fail. The easiest thing you can do on these sites is to plan to have somebody crop them or have yourself crop them for at least a year. Otherwise, you can start off with some kind of cover removal, such as haying or burning that's cover up. Otherwise, you can till or mow that in the fall prior. And then you're likely going to need to use a lot of herbicide. At least every 6 weeks, doing that, spraying with that mix of 2,4-D and glyphosate, if not more. In general, once the cover reaches 4 or 6 inches, going out there and spraying it again. And that's because we're just trying to deplete the seed bank of weeds. Those weeds are going to compete with those natives that we're trying to plant. So at least 1 year of site prep is minimum. The longer your site has been idle, the longer you can expect to have to do site prep on there, because there's going to be a larger seed bank there that you're going to want to kill off before you try to plant pollinators or natives out there. And our friend Reed Canary grass, I guess my best recommendations for Reed Canary grass is just to plant trees. Reed Canary grass is really good at its job, which is just growing everywhere. It has a really extensive seed. It's an extensive seed producer, so anywhere there's Reed Canary, there's a lot of seed in the bank right there, and trying to kill it off is just going to promote more seeds. So planting trees that'll eventually come over and canopy it out is the best scenario. In general, they recommend to mow the seed heads as they emerge in around August, and then treat with an herbicide in the fall of the same year, and then repeat as needed as it comes up. And I do have a document in the back that's ash replacement that'll give you some recommendations on trees or different ways you can try to combat Reed Canary grass with trees. Otherwise, I will mention there are some organic options for site prep. I typically don't recommend these unless it's a very small, manageable acreage. Xerces did do a publication on different methods. If you want to give it a look, you can just type in Google Xerces organic site prep. Yeah, feel free to give that a look. Otherwise, some general pointers. If you do go out there and till, other than a light surface tillage, you'll need to firm up that seed bed by cultipacking or rolling the site. If you do tillage, it'll likely bring weed seeds up from the seed bank, and you'll want to follow it up with an herbicide just because those will outcompete your natives. And then in general, the herbicides you use are contact herbicides, so they need at least 4 to 6 inches of regrowth, green, nice growing, nice or warm day in order to be effective. And if you are wanting to broadcast your seed on your site, you need at least 50% bare ground when you're looking out there, if not more. Typically, I recommend using a no-till drill just to get that good seed-to-soil contact. And the fun part, picking out your seed mix. So one factor in deciding on which seed mix to go with is cost, what kind of budget you have for your seed. As a native seed, if any of you have ordered it, can tend to be pretty expensive. But one misconception is more diverse mixes cost more. That's not true. It's just some flowers cost more than others, so you just need to be choosy with which flowers you throw out there, such as Black-Eyed Susans cost less than Blazing Star. Soils, you need to look at what soils you have out there, as different species do better in different soils, and I'll walk through how you can find that information for your property. And then goals, if you have any species you want to manage more for, such as grassland birds or monarchs, you'll want to include species that those tend to like. In general, as a good wildlife goal, I usually recommend 50% grasses to 50% flowers in your mix is just an overall good for wildlife. There are plenty of seed vendors in the area if you want to get your seed from them. Otherwise, that's in the back if you'd like to get that list. Otherwise, Pheasants Forever does offer seed. You can contact Dave Reuter. His information's up there. And we do have a bunch of canned mixes on our website for Wisconsin if you want to take a peek at those. Otherwise, if you want to support your local chapter, you can order seed through them as well. Just feel free to reach out to me, and I can get you in contact with them. Otherwise, Web Soil Survey, this is free for everybody to use, but you can go to this website, and you can zoom in on your property, and then in the corner, there's a little triangle with an AOI. You'll click that and then draw where your planting's going. And once you draw that, you'll click the Soil Map tab up at the top. And this is what you'll get. This will give you what type of soils you have and the percentage on that area. Once you have this information, you can look up Wisconsin Soil Moisture Regime Site Assessment Guide. And through this, you can get the different soil moisture regimes, so what soil moisture these soils are. For example, AX was the one on the previous slide, which is wet. A lot of custom or canned mixes from different companies will go off this. So you can look up dry music mix, and they'll a bunch will pop up from different websites for you. And if you have multiple soil moisture regimes on your plot, you can consider either planting them to different mixes or just finding a mix that overall suits all the soils. And now getting the seed in the ground. So luckily, the Door County Soil and Water Conservation Department has a 6-foot drill that you can rent, and their information is there. So how no-till drill specifically grass no-till drill works is they have 3 seed boxes. The front box is the small seed, which is meant for your flowers. The second box is for grass seed, which is really fluffy, if you've ever seen native grass seed. Oh, there's a picture of it there. And the grain box, which is the rear, typically big bin that's usually used for corn, your typical grains. So this was made before we had native seed really refined. It used to be really fluffy, and it would be necessary to have that middle grass box. But now, since seed flows really well, we're able to mix it with a carrier. Usually I recommend to use 32 pounds of oats per acre. And just mix everything together, which your seed vendors can do for you, and then just run it all through that grain box. And usually each drill has their own manual on how to calibrate it. The Tallgrass Prairie Center of Iowa also has some videos on how to calibrate a drill. And the biggest thing is make sure you're not planting too deep. You only want it to be about 1/8 of an inch deep. While you're planting it, if you see a lot of seeds on the surface, you're doing a great job. If you plant it too deep, it will fail. That's why the the soil needs to be really firm before you do so. Otherwise, the seeds will go too deep. Otherwise, if you don't want to do it yourself, there's a lot of contractors in the area that can do the whole process for you from start to finish. I do have a list in the back too if you want to take a look. Otherwise, you can reach out to your local NRCS or me if you have any questions on contractors. Otherwise, as far as seeding dates, NRCS recommends October 15th through June 30th, anytime between there, to seed natives. In general, there's kind of 3 different times, and they each have their pros and cons. The first is the dormant seeding, so that takes place from October 15th to when the soil is just about frozen. You want to make sure the temperature is below 50 degrees consistently, otherwise your natives will germinate prematurely and die. And in general, this will favor your forbs because they're able to go through a thing called stratification. So stratification is the freeze-thaw cycle in the winter that helps to crack the really hard exterior of seeds so they can germinate, or native seeds. Frost seeding is kind of similar. It's in February and March. This is good for wet sites because you can broadcast over the snow, and you want to make sure it's on a sunny day because those seeds are dark and the sun will help them sink through the soil or the snow. Similarly to dormant seeding, this will favor your forbs or your flowers and because of that stratification. Lastly is a spring seeding time. This occurs in May or June. This allows more time for site prep because you can get in one more herbicide before you put the seed out there, and it helps with weed abatement that first year. Although this will favor your grasses over your forbs because there isn't that stratification occurring. So your first year, after you plant it, is what you can expect. A lot of weeds. And it's critical you're out there mowing as much as you can this first year. We typically recommend at least 3 mowings. It just kind of depends on the site and how much moisture we're getting. In general, once the cover reaches knee high, you want to mow down to 7 inches and repeat as needed. That's because our natives are trying to work on their root system. They can be up to 16 feet deep, some flowers. So they're working on growing down, but you're going to have all your annual weeds trying to cover them up, shade them out. So it's just important to mow those down that first year so they can establish. And make sure you're mowing at that 7 inches, otherwise you're going to cut off your natives. So I always have landowners, we're humans, we're not patient. I'm like, there's nothing growing. So these are some things you can look for that first year. This fuzzy guy, so top, the second from the left, is Black-Eyed Susan, has really fuzzy leaves. So that's the one I'll look for. And the right one next to it to the right, that top one is bergamot. So if you crush the leaves, it'll smell minty. And usually the leaves have a little purple rim to it. Top left is partridge pea. The one below it is milkweed. To the right of that one is yellow coneflower. It has a distinctive leaf shape. To the right of that is evening primrose. So the stem on those leaves is usually pink, which is a good indicator. To the right of that is stiff goldenrod. It kind of has leathery leaves is the best way to describe it. And then the one above that is hoary vervain, which has a purplish stem. It's pretty clear to see. So those are some you can kind of see in that first year. So second year, it kind of just depends on how the site looks. Sometimes it can look like a beautiful Black-Eyed Susan patch and you don't need to mow, but sometimes there's still some weeds persisting and it's important to mow. Although that second year, you're probably going to be mowing some of the early flowers that are coming up, but don't worry, you're not hurting them. If you can see, this is all bergamot down here, and it's just root suckering, so it's creating a bunch more. And that third year, you'll see a lot of this native grass called Canada wild rye. So black-eyed Susans are biennial, so they'll probably only show up that second or third year and fade out. So it usually looks prettiest that second year. And it usually takes 5 to 10 years to really start to look like a prairie. Like this picture is a 10-year-old prairie. And sometimes it takes 10 years for some of your longer-lived perennials to show up, especially if you have shrubs in that mix. Otherwise, management term. So prairies were adapted on a cycle of fire and grazing. So a wildfire would sweep through and bison would come and graze that area because they really like the green, fresh green growth. Cows do the same thing, which is a management tactic some prairie managers use down south. It's called patch burn grazing. So they'll take like a quarter section of their range and burn that, and the cows will naturally flock to that area, but it'll create a mosaic of habitat because you'll have some that haven't been burned for 3 years, some that you'll just have a bunch of different habitat types. And once you do get a prairie established, they're really resilient communities. This picture is from a prairie that was burned during an extensive 2-year drought and then grazed heavily afterwards, and this is what came up the next year. So they like disturbance. So most prairie seedings around here are made up of native grasses, which are warm season, so they have a different growth cycle than most of our introduced grasses, which are cool season grasses. And this is why you can manage for them because they grow at different times. So obviously cool season grasses have 2 different growth periods, so in the spring and the fall. So if you time a mow, a burn, a hay at the right time, you can set back those cool season grasses that might be encroaching on your warm season planting. So we're in northern Wisconsin. It naturally wants to be trees, all these areas, which is why it's important to have that disturbance. But we do have a lot of deciduous trees, which usually were normally controlled by really, extensive burns during drought conditions, really heavy heat versus prescribed burns now, which are more controlled than wildfires. So normally, a normal fire won't tend to kill these. You'll probably have to go through and clip those and then treat the stem with an herbicide. Or you can mow these back. Sometimes willows you might have to mow back every year because they'll grow 6 feet in the year. Just an FYI. And then burning. Burning is the best thing you can do for your prairie. And I do have a list of contractors in the back that can help you with a prescribed burn on your prairie. And the different timing of burns can really affect your prairie community. There's this sweet spot. Usually it's around May, where you can set back cool season grasses and encourage your warm seasons and your flowers. But growing season burns, so around this time, July or August, those are really good for people that are just starting out fire if you want to try burning, because everywhere is green and you're just going to burn that litter layer. So thatch layer, that buildup of thatch layer is really detrimental to young wildlife like chicks, pheasant chicks, turkey poults. That's because when they come out of the shell, they're little guys. It's tough for them to wade through an entire thick mat. I mean, just imagine trying to walk through a grass field that hasn't been mowed or anything in the past 10 years. So they really need that removal of thatch to have good habitat for them. And we call this brood rearing habitat when there's a lot of bare ground, but overhead canopy for the chicks. And usually that produces a lot of insects that are good for those chicks, but also good for grassland birds and a bunch of other wildlife. Otherwise, getting into financial assistance. So last week, Jason went over a lot of different programs. My program I focus with in the area is called CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program. And this program was originally developed to help farmers with areas that weren't productive and putting those in some kind of perennial habitat and then giving them a payment for those acres. Although since then it has really developed and taken off into bringing back the prairie, bringing back wildlife habitat to these areas. So for this program to be eligible, the land has to have been cropped 4 of the 6 years from 2012 to 2017. That's the current range we're looking at, and you have to have owned the property for at least a year. Through this program, we have to 50% base cost share on establishment or helping you establish that prairie. And we also offer an annual rental payment based on the soils you have out there each year of your contract. For Door County, it's an average of $100 per acre. Although this is a 10 or 15 year commitment in which the contract stays with the land, even if you sell it, that person will be responsible for taking it up, or you will owe back what we gave you. And you must maintain the cover, so you have to control any invasives that come up, any woody vegetation that comes up. We don't want any food plots made out there or permanent structures. Some misconceptions with this program is there isn't a minimum acreage. We're not going to go down to feet, but we can do a 1/4 acre. It does not need to be your entire field. We can do parts of it, and it does not open the land up to the public. One popular subset of this program is called the Monarch Safe program. This is because it offers additional incentives, financial incentives on top of those, that base cost share and the rental payment. And it offers great habitat for monarch butterflies. There are different subsets in this program that can allow you to plant trees. You can do wetland restorations, filter strips. There's a bunch of different things, but that's just a little bit about the program. Otherwise, I know that was a lot, but are there any questions? So 2,4-D tends to control your annual broadleaves or the alfalfa. But if you have a mixed forage stand, the glyphosate really helps to control the grasses that you'll have in there. Otherwise, straight 2,4-D if you just have alfalfa works. Otherwise, there is a bunch of information pamphlets up there and my card if you want to reach out to me. Yep, Door County. Yep, for both. I cover both. I think it's just the very northern counties this doesn't cover because there's no cropland up there. So.
I kind of missed what you said about Monarch Safe. What is that again?
It's a subset of CRP that's specific for monarch habitat, and it offers additional financial incentives on top of what you would normally get through CRP. This is typically what Door County folks are enrolling in. If you're ever super interested in prairies, Chris Helzer also has a blog. He posts on quite frequently about prairies. It's called The Prairie Ecologist if you ever want to check it out. He also has a lot of nice pictures. A lot of these pictures were taken by him, specifically this one. Yeah, if you guys, oh. Mm-hmm. Just a year. Sure. I know sometimes they're out of seeds just because of the year. They didn't get a good seed production on whatever species, but if you check out that vendor list too, you can see if other people will have that in stock. Yeah, if you can do a burn. Otherwise, if you mow, you're going to have that litter layer, and that'll encourage mice. Might girdle your new trees. So if you can burn, it's really good. Plus, that burn just adds nutrients back to the soil. Right. Right. I don't have a better recommendation than going through and clipping each one and treating with. Yep. Right. Right. Uh, Plus, your neighbors probably have them, and wildlife are tracking them in every year, so it's just an annual maintenance thing, unfortunately. Oh yeah, we could probably track every invasive to 30 years ago when they were planting it for a purpose.
So if you're looking at something and you find that establishing prairie, as you talked about, is not really possible. I mean, you've got a lot of things you have to do.
Hmm.
What's the in between? You've got a field that's been, worked, and you want to create a buffer,
Hmm.
with grasses or whatever.
Yep.
What does that look like? Is there an in between?
Between like flowers and grasses, or
Between the authentic prairie that you're talking about and the realization that you could put some grasses in there to better filter the water.
yep. So typically with filter strips, we try to do a heavier grass component because they are better at filtering. But that doesn't mean we can't put some flowers in there. But there is you can customize it to your site if you want more grasses, if you want more flowers.
So you're thinking a filtering strip would be kind of an in-between.
Yep, for sure.
And we're responsible, the landowner's responsible for getting that land ready, turning over the soil and everything. Then you get your planter,
Hmm.
go over with that. Then we would work with you on a specific, like what kind of mixture. I mean, I don't know anything about soil
Right.
quality, so on and so on. So, I'm lost between my desire to do something and not having the information I need.
Right. And that's part of my job too, is just going out to sites. And if you don't want to use our program, I can still give you a plan for your site where I'll walk you through what site prep you should do, give you the resources, the mix that you need. That's part of my job. But
You can have me come out and give you
well, but yeah, otherwise if you do go through financial assistance through NRCS, or if you go through Lara's program, we'll provide a plan for you. So you don't have to walk through that whole process I just did.
Well, I mean, all the people we've seen have been very helpful. It's just putting it all together.
Right.
It's actionable. That I find a little frustrating because I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
So we can contact you and invite you to come out.
Yep.
So we have like a back fallow field that's been fallow for quite a while.
Mhm.
And then there is green grass there, but there's also a lot of the different flowers that you mentioned.
Mhm.
The different positives.
Right.
But we were told, well, and there is a willow, because we lost the ash, now all the ash trees that were growing, then we have more green grass,
Yep.
correct? So then, a suggestion was made to plant willows,
Mhm.
because that would kill that, but then I just heard that we should probably get, so are we looking at a long perspective? In other words, you get rid of the willows, and then you have to use the willows to get rid of the weed canary grass, but then you have to get rid of the willows, is that it?
No. So like how prairies are early successional, willows are early successional. That's why they grow so fast. So eventually a different community will come over, take over them. Yep.
So one more question, so you've got this reed canary grass. I mean, okay, I'm a city boy, okay, but I now know what it kind of looks like. Okay,
Mhm.
so we've got what, smaller patch of it now? You know, well, I mean, it hasn't taken over the whole field.
Right.
You know, so how do you go after that? What do you do?
Plant trees.
No, I mean, you gotta get the,
Plant trees, right?
That's kind of my recommendation. I've seen people try to spray it for 3 years straight and it's still there. So, or it'll just come right back in. If it floods from animals, it's really good at invading.
so you know, you plant, you identify the canary grass, and you plant either bushes or
Mhm.
trees. Doesn't the canary grass grow above the tree and not allow it to grow? Or do you have to keep, you know, knocking down that area where you plant
Um,
so they get enough light to grow?
so with trees, you can apply a pre-emergent herbicide that'll help knock back the reed canary. And usually with tree establishment, we recommend you mow as close to those tree lines as you can, which will set back that reed canary and allow it to grow over it.
So you have to,
One of those things that just kind of got away.
Yeah.
We hate to wipe out a whole chunk of planting, you know, 15, 20 years old.
Right. Otherwise, if you do have grasses out there, if you use a broadleaf specific herbicide, at least it won't kill your grasses. You could try that. So you're not killing everything, but
That's why I asked why you're mixing the 2,4-D in there. I know that's more broadleaf.
right.
But I thought it was just around 5, 8% vial, and then 2 or 3 or 4 passes for a year and a half before it infested the primary.
And then a lot of alfalfa is Roundup Ready too. The alfalfa is Roundup Ready. A lot of it is. So glyphosate's not going to do anything to it. Yeah. Otherwise, there is an herbicide called Milestone, which might help. If you have specific noxious weeds, such as spotted knapweed specifically, there's mixes, native mixes that are tolerant to this herbicide that'll kill other things such as thistles, spotted knapweed, so you can spray your prairie. I don't know if it works on crown vetch, but something to look into. But yeah, if you guys don't have anything, you're more than welcome to go. Or if you want to come up and ask me a specific question too, more than welcome to. Otherwise, thank you guys for coming out. Appreciate it. Thank you.